We'll hear argument first this morning in Case 12-1281, the National Labor Relations Board versus Noel Canning. General Verrilli.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the Court, the interpretation of the Recess Appointments Clause that Respondent urges would repudiate the constitutional legitimacy of thousands of appointments by presidents going back to George Washington. And going forward, it would diminish presidential authority in a way that is flatly at odds with the constitutional structure the framers established. Respondent simply has not advanced the compelling case that would be needed to strip presidents of their traditional authority to make appointments during intra-session recesses and to fill pre-existing vacancies.
You say that it would repudiate the constitutionality of appointments. You don't suggest that the actions of those appointees would be invalid going back however far you want to go back, do you?
No, I don't, Mr. Chief Justice, but it certainly would repudiate the legitimacy of those appointments.
How did it affect how many board decisions will have to be redone, or how is the board coping with that problem?
Well, there are many dozens of board decisions and perhaps many hundreds of board decisions that are under a cloud as a result of the D.C. Circuit's ruling in this case. And so the board will have a considerable amount of work to do if the D.C. Circuit's decision were to be affirmed. Now, there would be issues about waiver. There'll be issues about whether there is authority sufficient to justify what the board did under other circumstances or apparent authority arguments. So that would all have to be sorted out with respect to the board's ruling.
What would happen if, under the reasoning of this case, what would happen to the decisions of recess-appointed judges?
Well, I think
of
that
which
would be,
there's been quite a few.
I think that would be a very serious question, Justice Sotomayor, and I think it does point up the difficulty with the position Respondent is urging.
Well, surely you would argue the de facto officer doctrine.
Yes, we would.
Of course you would.
Yes, we would.
We've applied that in innumerable cases.
Nevertheless, but
you don't really think we're going to go back and rip out every decision made?
Well, I would certainly hope not, Your Honor, but it certainly casts a serious cloud over the legitimacy of all of those actions, and it does point up the fact that the recess power, including appointments during intra-session recesses and to fill pre-existing vacancies, has been used to fill offices of great importance.
You started off by saying, it would repudiate so many actions that have been taken. I have a very stark question. Suppose I agree with the Court of Appeals that the only interpretation of the Constitution is that the vacancy must have arisen during the recess, just by hypothesis. I agree with that, okay? What do you do when there is a practice that flatly contradicts a clear text of the Constitution? Which of the two prevails?
Now, I think the practice has to prevail, Your Honor, but I do. But I take
so if you ignore the Constitution,
but I don't think
often enough, its meaning changes.
But, Your Honor, of course, in this situation, the meaning of the clause with respect to the timing of the vacancy has been a matter of contention since the first days of the Republic.
You're questioning my hypothesis. You have to accept my hypothesis.
Well, I think I've answered the question.
Let's assume that the text is clearly against you. Should I say, oh, yes, it says something else, but the practice for over 200 years has been something different, and it's the practice that must prevail?
The practice has started with George Washington and has worked through.
Yeah, yes or no? Does the practice prevail over the clear text?
The practice gives meaning to the practice gives meaning to the Constitution.
You're questioning my hypothesis against. I am assuming a clear text of the Constitution